Every empire that has ever tried to conquer the Iranian plateau, from Alexander's Macedonia to the British Empire, has walked away either broken, bankrupt, or forever changed. Not because Iran always wins on the battlefield, but because Iran has a way of outlasting the ambition of those who come to bury it. And right now, as you sit here watching gas prices eat through your paycheck, as your mortgage rate just jumped to levels not seen in over a year, and as American bombers fly missions over Tehran, a city of 10 million people, funded by your tax dollars and politically driven by decisions made in Tel Aviv as much as Washington, you need to ask yourself one serious question. How did we get here? Not the official version, not the talking points. The real story, the one about power, history, oil, empire, and the trap that the United States may have already walked into without a single vote being cast by the American people. Because what is happening right now in March 2026 is not just a military operation, it is a civilizational gamble. And the house is being bet on your behalf, whether you agreed to it or not. Let us start from the beginning, not 2023, not October 7th. Let us start from where honest history demands we begin. Iran, or Persia, as it was known for millennia, is not simply a nation state in the modern sense. It is a civilization with more than 2,500 years of continuous cultural identity. Alexander the Great swept through it, burned Persepolis to the ground in a drunken rage, and within 2 generations his successors were being absorbed into Persian court culture rather than the other way around. The Mongols under Hulagu Khan sacked Baghdad and put an end to the Abbasid Caliphate, which was supposed to change everything forever. And yet within decades, the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia had converted to Islam, was patronizing Persian poets, and was writing court documents in Persian. The British came, manipulated, divided, propped up, and then dismantled the Qajar dynasty, engineered a coup in 1953 that overthrew a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh because he had the audacity to nationalize Iranian oil, installed a Shah, and then watched in absolute disbelief in 1979 as that Shah fled and a revolution consumed everything they had built. Every single time, every empire, every power, they come in believing their technology, their firepower, their wealth, and their strategic cleverness will finally be enough to bend Iran to their will permanently. And every single time, the Iranian plateau has a different answer waiting for them. Now, here we are. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what they called Operation Epic Fury, nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours alone, targeting Iranian missiles and air defenses, military infrastructure, and most critically, the Iranian leadership itself. Those large-scale strikes killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a man who had led that country for nearly 4 decades. Think about what that means for a moment. The United States, a nation that publicly decries assassinations and regime change abroad, just participated in the deliberate killing of the head of state of a sovereign nation of nearly 90 million people. Not in secret like the old CIA operations, openly, brazenly, with stealth aircraft and precision-guided munitions worth millions of dollars per sortie. And the American public was essentially handed this war in a single news cycle with very little congressional debate and even less explanation of how this ends. Let us talk about how we got to February 28 of this year, because the road to this war is a road paved with deliberate choices, missed diplomatic exits, and the extraordinary influence of one foreign government over American military policy. Upon returning to office in 2025, Trump restored his maximum pressure campaign against Tehran while also initiating negotiations on its nuclear program, the first direct US-Iran talks since he withdrew from the JCPOA nuclear deal in 2018. Israel was wholly opposed to those negotiations and maintained an unwavering commitment to dismantling Iran's nuclear program. Read that again slowly. Israel was opposed to the talks, and the talks failed, and then the war began. Is that a coincidence, or is that a pattern? According to the White House, Iran rejected a proposal for a civilian nuclear program with American investment in exchange for dismantling its nuclear program. But here is what the mainstream American media conveniently buries underneath the noise. The Omani foreign minister said he was dismayed and that active and serious negotiations had been undermined. Before the strikes, a 4th round of talks had been scheduled. Technical teams were due to meet in Vienna, together with IAEA experts. Iran was at the table. The table was kicked over. And now here we are, 30 days into a war that nobody in America voted for, with gas prices that have gone up by $1 or more per gallon, mortgage rates climbing, and a Strait of Hormuz that is functionally strangling the global energy system. Due to Iran's selective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the world is losing as much as 20 million barrels of oil per day from Middle Eastern producers. Since the war began, Brent crude has risen more than 50%. According to the International Energy Agency, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is the biggest oil shock in history. The biggest oil shock in history. Not the 1973 Arab embargo, not the Gulf War, not the post-invasion chaos in Iraq. This, right now. And ordinary Americans are the ones paying for it at the pump, at the grocery store, in their heating bills, and through the coming wave of inflation that the IMF has already warned will ripple through every economy on Earth. The head of the International Energy Agency described the situation caused by the war as the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Europe is sitting with gas storage at 30% capacity after a brutal winter, and the Qatari LNG that was supposed to bridge the gap is now caught in the crossfire. Dutch TTF gas benchmarks nearly doubled to over 60 euros per megawatt hour by mid-March. Bangladesh is closing universities early. Pakistan and the Philippines declared 4-day work weeks. The world economy is being restructured in real time around a war that was launched without a global consensus, without UN authorization, and with motives that keep shifting week to week. Because let us talk about the motives, since they are extraordinary in their instability. Trump administration officials have offered diverse and changing explanations for starting the war, such as to preempt Iranian retaliation against US assets, to ward off an imminent Iranian threat, to destroy Iran's missile and military capabilities, to prevent Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, to secure Iran's natural resources, and to achieve regime change by bringing the Iranian opposition to power. 6 different justifications for one war that is not strategic clarity, that is improvisation at the highest possible cost, and the imminent threat narrative, the one that has historically been used to justify every military adventure since Iraq 2003, crumbled immediately. Iranian and some US officials rejected claims that Iran had been preparing an attack. The IAEA said there was no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program when the 2026 war began. So let us be absolutely clear about what we know as of today, March 31st, 2026. The United States went to war with Iran based on shifting justifications over the objections of ongoing diplomacy, with the strong encouragement of Israel and without congressional authorization that would satisfy most constitutional scholars. The result is a war that has now spread to strike targets in 9 countries, has killed more than 2,300 people, has created the largest oil shock in recorded history, is pushing global inflation higher, and has no visible diplomatic exit ramp. Unlike the June 2025 12-day war, a drastic strategic pivot from degrading nuclear infrastructure to executing a decapitation strike against the Iranian leadership shattered the previous rules of engagement, dragging the region into an open-ended war of attrition with 0 diplomatic off-ramps. And here is where the history lesson becomes viscerally relevant to your life, right now, today. The United States has been in this position before. Not with Iran specifically, but with the logic, with the architecture of the trap. You go in to destroy something. You destroy the leadership. You expect the population to rise up, welcome you, hand you the country's future on a platter. And instead, you get resistance. You get a new generation that did not love the old regime, but absolutely hates the foreign bombs. You get a war of attrition. You get a bill that keeps growing. You get a region that hates you more than it ever hated the government you toppled. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost the United States approximately $3.7 billion, mostly unbudgeted. 100 hours, $3.7 billion unbudgeted, and that number will only grow every day, every sortie, every cruise missile, every interceptor fired at Iranian drones over Gulf state cities. Now, let us talk about Israel's role in this, because this is the conversation that American mainstream media is structurally incapable of having honestly. Israel was wholly opposed to the negotiations and maintained an unwavering commitment to dismantling Iran's nuclear program. When direct talks between Washington and Tehran were showing progress, when the Omani foreign minister was speaking of significant movement, Israel effectively torpedoed that process by making it politically untenable for Trump to continue. Israel launched a unilateral military strike against Iran on June 13, 2025, targeting nuclear facilities, missile factories, senior military officials, and nuclear scientists, which forced the American hand long before February 2026. Every move Israel made was designed to shrink the space for American diplomacy and expand the inevitability of American military participation. And it worked. Because that is how this relationship actually functions, beneath the comfortable language of shared values and the closest of allies. The question of whether the United States is trapped by Israel is not an anti-Semitic question. It is not even a particularly radical question. It is the question that realist foreign policy scholars from John Mearsheimer to the late Zbigniew Brzezinski have been asking for decades. When a foreign government has sufficient influence over American domestic politics, American campaign financing, American media narratives, and American military decision-making, at what point does the tail wag the dog? At what point does American strategic interest and Israeli strategic interest diverge so sharply that even the most loyal ally relationship becomes a liability? That point, I would argue, has been reached and passed. The U.S. Postal Service will charge a first ever 8% fuel surcharge on packages, adding to costs for American consumers and businesses as a result of the war with Iran. Over the past month, a regular gallon of gas has gone up by around $1 to $3.98 on average nationally. Diesel prices have increased even more by $1.61 a gallon. That is real. That is tangible. That is the cost of this alliance landing directly in the wallets of Americans who have nothing to do with the geopolitics of the Persian Gulf and did not vote for any of this. Trump said he is still considering whether to seize Iran's Karg Island, a key fuel hub in the northern Persian Gulf, which handles 90% of Tehran's oil exports. Seize a sovereign island of a country that the United States is not formally at war with by congressional declaration. And then what? Trump acknowledged that it would mean U.S. forces would have to remain there for a while. Sound familiar? A while. In American military history, a while has a specific meaning. It meant 20 years in Afghanistan. It meant the longest war in American history. It meant trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives and a withdrawal that looked like a defeat broadcast live on every television screen on Earth. A while is how empires explain what they cannot yet admit to themselves. On March 29, 2026, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf rejected the ongoing negotiations with the United States, saying that Iran could not be forced into submission. That sentence needs to sit in your mind for a moment. Could not be forced into submission. This is not bravado. This is not propaganda for internal consumption only. This is a 2,500-year-old civilization speaking from experience. The Persians have watched empires come and go. They watched Alexander come and eventually absorb him into their culture. They watched the Arabs come and eventually absorbed Islam into a distinctly Persian identity. They watched the Mongols come and slowly turned them into Persians who happened to be Mongols. They watched the British come and eventually drove them out. They are watching us now. And what they see is not a coherent long-term strategic vision. What they see is confusion dressed up in military hardware. A Financial Times investigation found that $580 million in bets on falling oil prices had been placed just 15 minutes before Trump published his statement about postponing attacks on Iran for talks on March 23, 2026, which caused oil prices to fall temporarily. This resulted in speculation about insider trading and calls for further investigation. $500 million in perfectly timed market bets placed minutes before a presidential announcement changed oil prices. In any functioning democracy, that would be the lead story everywhere. Instead, it is buried beneath the daily theater of missile strikes and negotiation rumors. This is what the concentration of power looks like in practice. The war is expensive for you. For someone somewhere with access to the right information at the right moment, this war has already been a financial windfall. Iran's counterstrikes on Arab Gulf states in 2026, who have sought to deepen relations in recent years, may also leave Iran further isolated. Yes, that is true. Iran is more isolated than it was 6 months ago. But isolation is not the same as defeat. Iraq was isolated after 1991. It survived another 12 years before the next invasion. And the next invasion, the one that was supposed to be quick, decisive, and welcomed by a grateful people, became a decade-long catastrophe that reordered the Middle East in ways that empowered Iran more than anything Tehran itself could have engineered. The law of unintended consequences does not suspend itself for American exceptionalism. Every action here generates reactions that the war planners have either not modeled accurately or have chosen to ignore. An estimated 20,000 seafarers are stranded in the region, caught in the crossfire of the US-Israeli war with Iran. Real human beings, sailors from dozens of countries, trapped between powers playing a very high-stakes game. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil normally passes, has become a choke point that is squeezing not just Iranian revenue, but the entire architecture of global trade. Netanyahu said he believes pipelines should be built to transport oil and gas through the Arabian Peninsula into Israeli ports to avoid Iranian threats to the Strait of Hormuz. Read that with clear eyes. The Israeli Prime Minister is already designing the post-war energy architecture, one that runs through Israeli territory, generating Israeli leverage, cementing Israeli centrality to the Gulf's economic future. That is not a coincidence. That is strategy. Long-term, patient, sophisticated strategy from a nation that thinks in decades, while Washington thinks in news cycles. The deeper historical truth here is this: Iran has never been conquered and held permanently. Not once, not in millennia. Every empire that has tried to permanently subjugate the Iranian plateau has found that the land, the culture, the language, and the people have an extraordinary capacity for absorption, resilience, and eventual reversal. What changes is not Iran's fundamental character, but the character of those who come to conquer it. They leave different, poorer, more entangled, more committed to a conflict they can no longer easily exit. That is the trap. Not a military trap in the conventional sense, a civilizational trap, a trap of entanglement, a trap where each escalation makes de-escalation more politically costly than continuing, even when continuing is strategically catastrophic. And that is exactly where the United States finds itself on March 31st, 2026. 30 days into a war with no exit strategy, with oil prices rewriting the economic expectations of every household in America, with a diplomatic track that was alive and showing progress just weeks before the bombs fell, and which was effectively killed by the pressure and preferences of a foreign government, with a bill already in the billions and climbing every single hour, with a region that is watching, calculating, and drawing its own conclusions about American reliability, American restraint, and American judgment, with a global South that has seen this movie before and is increasingly refusing to pretend it ends differently this time. History is not a warning that America received and heeded. History is the verdict that empires only understand after the fact, when the cost has already been paid and the landscape has already shifted permanently beneath their feet. The question is not whether Iran will survive this. History has already answered that question many times over. The question is what the United States looks like on the other side of it, and whether the American people, the ones paying at the pump, the ones whose sons and daughters wear the uniform, the ones whose retirement savings are riding on markets that are being roiled by a war they never authorized, will finally demand an honest accounting of how their country keeps finding itself in these places, at these costs, for whose benefit.